Chapter 16. The Living Florist Floor. The ground moved while they slept. Not a tremor, not an earthquake, just a slow, deep settling of the forest floor, like a long breath pulling inward through soil and moss. It happened silently, without wind or warning. The dirt beneath the tents shifted half an inch, then another, flexing like skin stretched over something just beneath the surface. By morning, the indentation where Jackson had laid was deeper than it had been the night before, but he didn't notice, not at first. The five of them had arrived the previous evening, all dusted in sweat and trail grit, panting as they hiked the final stretch into the basin. It was a low, moss-choked bowl between two ridges, shaded by enormous spruce and pine, the canopy so thick that light came through in green shafts. There was no trail marker, no signs of recent activity, which was exactly what they wanted. Something off-map, something quiet, something theirs. Jackson and Mal set up the tents, while Bree and Elena collected water from a nearby creek that cut through the base of the hill like a scar. Dan cooked beans and sausages on the camp stove, talking loudly to no one in particular, a rolling stream of sarcasm and overconfident advice. "Sleeping pads not for comfort," he told Jackson. "It's a barrier. You think the ground's soft? Sure, until it eats your body heat like a goddamn vampire." Jackson just nodded and kept hammering stakes into the dirt. The moss squished underfoot, thick and damp, clinging to his boots with an oily film. He made a mental note to dry his socks before bed. Later, when they sat around the fire, Mal mentioned that the forest here smelled too clean. No animal scat, no mushrooms, not even a trace of rot, just pine and wet earth. That night they joked late into the dark. They told twisted versions of urban legends. Dan mimed a Bigfoot mating call and got Elena laughing so hard she spilled half her whiskey. The fire cast their shadows high against the trunks of the surrounding trees, and above the canopy stirred like something breathing just out of sight. They didn't talk about how quiet it had gotten. No birds, no owls, not even the faint rustle of squirrels in the branches, just their voices and the pop of firewood. At midnight they turned in, one by one. Jackson was last. He sat beside the fire until the coals turned gray, staring into the embers as his skin prickled with cold. He felt uneasy, but he couldn't explain why. The ground beneath his chair felt too soft. He shifted his weight, and the chair legs sunk half an inch deeper into the moss. He stood and packed up. Inside his tent, the air was damp. The ground was unusually warm against his back as he lay down, but he assumed the heat was from the fire. He drifted off quickly, lulled by the hum of silence. At dawn, the birds returned, briefly. Bree was the first to wake. She unzipped her tent to a sky turning orange above the ridgeline. She stepped out barefoot, toes squishing into wet moss. Her tent had sunk slightly into the ground during the night. The corners of the tarp were buried in soil. She didn't think much of it, not at first. Just a soft patch, she figured, waterlogged. She wandered toward the fire pit, rubbing her eyes, and froze when she saw the ground. Something was wrong. There were footprints. Deep ones, leading from her tent past the fire to the edge of the tree line. Only one set, and they ended. Not at a log, not a stream. They just stopped, like the person had stepped forward and vanished. "Jackson?" she called. No answer. She checked his tent, unzipped it slowly. Empty. The sleeping bag was half unrolled, twisted toward the center like he had turned over and disappeared mid-dream. His boots were gone. His flashlight lay in the corner, untouched. Bree backed out, heart thudding. Moll emerged from her own tent, rubbing the back of her neck. "He gone for a piss?" "No," Bree said. "He's not here." Dan stumbled out next, scratching at his beard. "What's going on?" "Elena!" Bree shouted. Nothing. They moved quickly now, opening tents, calling names. Only 3 of the 5 remained. Jackson and Elena were missing. Moll cursed under her breath, pulling on her jacket. No one heard anything? No footsteps? There's no trail, Bree said. The prints just end. Dan circled the camp, following the faint indents left by bare feet. Jackson's boots still hadn't been found, but the mossy ground made tracking impossible. Every few yards, the prints faded entirely. He found a small patch near the creek where something had disturbed the underbrush, but nothing that led anywhere. By full morning, the temperature rose, and the moss beneath their feet began to feel looser, almost spongy. Bree knelt and touched it with her fingers. It was warm. Too warm. She pressed deeper and felt the surface give slightly, like pressing into a damp sponge. Moll crouched beside her. It's the soil. Something's weird with it. No, Bree said. It's moving. They dug with a stick and uncovered a pocket beneath the moss, a shallow void filled with a dark, sticky sludge that clung to the wood like molasses. It had no smell. It was just wet and silent. Dan leaned in and said, Jesus, did we pitch camp on a peat bog? Peat bogs don't open and close, Bree said. They stood, all 3 looking down at the hole. The moss around the edge was healing, creeping inward, slow but noticeable. It moved like time-lapse footage of mold growing. Dan stepped back, face pale. Where's Jackson? Moll asked. No one answered. They didn't pack. They didn't even speak. They just left. They moved fast, heading back toward the trail they had come from, but within half an hour they realized they were looping. The markers they carved into trees the day before had disappeared. The terrain didn't look the same. The creek they passed now ran in the wrong direction. It was as if the forest had reorganized itself overnight. We need to climb, Moll said. We need elevation. They picked a steep incline and hiked until their legs ached, until Dan dropped to one knee gasping and Bree's throat burned. When they reached the top of the ridge, the forest spread out below them in every direction. But they saw no trails, no clearing, just trees and green. Too much green. Bree noticed first. The moss did not stop at the ground. It grew up the trees, across fallen logs, over rocks. It covered everything. No bare earth, no dry bark. The whole forest was carpeted, thick and glistening. She scanned the forest floor and saw depressions. Dozens. Small, body-sized dents in the moss, some old, some fresh. People, Bree whispered. What? Dan said. This has happened before. Moll squinted. Those are sleeping spots. And they didn't get up, Bree said. A distant sound echoed through the trees. A wet, sucking gurgle, followed by a shudder that moved through the canopy like a breeze that touched nothing but leaves. The moss pulsed, not just near them, everywhere. A slow, rolling twitch of the forest floor like something had taken a breath. The ridge beneath their feet shifted, not violently, not enough to knock them down, just enough to feel, like something had stirred deeper, underneath. Bree stumbled back from the edge, panting. We have to get off the moss. Mal pointed to a large rocky outcrop a few hundred feet down the slope. There, it's stone. It won't move. They descended fast, sliding at times, scraping arms and shins against roots and branches. Dan fell once, catching himself on a low branch, but tore his sleeve and cursed. When they reached the stone shelf, they collapsed on their backs, breathing hard. The ground here felt solid, cold beneath them. It was almost noon. No one had said Jackson or Elena's names since they left camp. Mal sat upright, staring into the trees. There's something under us, she said quietly. Bree nodded. I felt it too. Like a network. Something big. Dan was silent for a long time, then finally said, "You remember how the moss didn't smell? Nothing smelled like decay? That's because nothing gets the chance to rot. It's all eaten." They sat in silence. The forest was quiet again. Then the moss near the edge of the stone moved. Just a ripple, but it moved toward them. Mal rose and backed away. Then the ripple stopped. The moss just sat there, innocent and green. Bree whispered, "It's waiting." They huddled on the outcrop for most of the afternoon, taking turns scanning the moss line for movement. The sunlight weakened overhead, filtered to a dull haze by dense clouds. No breeze came through the trees. There were no birds anymore. The woods had gone still again, holding its breath. Dan sat with his back to the rock, his injured arm pressed against his stomach. The gash from the fall had worsened, soaked through his shirt. Mal ripped fabric from her spare and tied it off, but the bleeding hadn't stopped. He was pale now, sweating, his eyes dim and unfocused. "We need help," Bree said, pacing the flat space of the outcrop. "We need to move, tonight. We move, we touch the moss again. Then we don't sleep, not here, not anywhere. We stay awake until we make it out." Dan's lips twitched in something like a smile. "We haven't eaten. We're dehydrated. You think you can stay awake in this heat with no rest and no food? You'll crash. We all will." "We don't have a choice," Mal said. "You saw what it did." Dan exhaled slowly, closed his eyes for a long time, then said, "Then we use me." Bree turned. "What?" "I can't walk, not far. I can't climb. I can barely keep my eyes open. You two go. One of you carries the radio if the ridge clears enough for a signal. I stay here." Mal shook her head. "No. You saw what it wants. It waits until you're still. I'm the bait. I distract it while you move. If it comes for me, you'll feel it shift. You'll know it's distracted." Bree looked at Mal. Her throat ached with the lump building in it. "We're not leaving you." Dan forced a smile. "You don't have a choice either. Not if you want to make it." Mal's eyes glistened. "There's another way." "There isn't," he said. No one spoke after that. Time passed in long, slow drips. They rationed what water they had left. Bree poured a little over her burned hand, where the skin had begun to crack and blacken. It looked wrong, too smooth at the edges, like it had been chemically sealed rather than burned. When the sun dipped below the ridgeline, the shadows returned in full. The moss at the edge of the stone hadn't moved in hours. It still sat there, innocuous and still, soft as ever. But every so often, they saw it twitch, a ripple, a slow tightening, a pulse. When it got dark, Bree stood and slung her pack over one shoulder. She had nothing left in it but a half-empty bottle, a flint striker, and a thermal blanket. Mal did the same, loading their gear quickly, wrapping her flashlight in gauze to dim the beam. They both looked at Dan. He was sitting up now, propped against a boulder, his knife laid flat in his lap. "You sure?" Bree asked. He gave her a tired smile. "You see it again. Stab it. Stab the earth itself. And if it talks, don't listen." "We're coming back," Mal said. He didn't answer. Bree and Mal stepped off the stone. The moss was cold now, not spongy, hard and cool, like it had gone dormant or was pretending. They moved quickly and lightly, sticking to rocks and tree roots wherever possible, avoiding direct contact with the soil. Every 10 or 15 steps, Bree stopped to check the direction. She was watching the sky, trying to stay aligned with the moon. North, always north, back toward the road. For an hour, nothing happened. They passed familiar trees, some of them twisted with markings they had left days ago. Mal paused once and touched a gouge in the bark she had made herself, but the wood had already begun to heal. The groove was closing, smoothened over by a layer of soft green fuzz. They hadn't gone in circles. The forest was undoing their marks. Halfway down a slope, Mal stopped walking. Her light was still wrapped, casting only a dull glow. She pointed ahead to where the path narrowed between two leaning trees. A root system there had burst upward, turning the forest floor into a shallow trench of moss and exposed tendrils. Something had moved across it, something massive. A drag mark, long and smooth, with small punctures along the side, like fingers or spines. Bree stepped over it, barely breathing. The air shifted. Below them, the forest floor rippled like a wave, pushing outward in every direction. It was fast, too fast. Bree grabbed Mal and yanked her backward. The ripple passed beneath their feet, cracking branches and hissing through the leaves. A moment later, a tremor ran up the trees nearby, and a distant groan echoed through the woods, deep and wet and hungry. "It's awake," Mal whispered. Bree didn't answer. She already knew. They ran. No more caution, no more stepping light. They sprinted, dodging roots, vaulting over fallen logs, pushing through hanging branches with no regard for noise. Behind them, the earth flexed again, a rise, like something huge shifting beneath a membrane. Then a sound, something between a crack and a suck. The ground opened, not like an earthquake, like jaws. Something dragged itself upward, limbs of root and soil twisting together, shaped like arms, fused with moss and stone. It had no face, but a vertical slit opened along its chest, revealing slick tendrils coiled in a spiral. Mal screamed. Bree pulled her forward.
They scrambled over a slope of shale and dirt. The creature did not give chase like an animal. It advanced with slow, deliberate purpose, sinking and rising with each breath of the land. Where it moved, the forest reshaped around it. Trees bent aside, moss grew longer, the earth buckled. Bree saw the ridge ahead, the same ridge they had climbed that morning. They were almost there, but the ground beneath her shifted suddenly. She tripped. Her foot sank into moss that was no longer stable. She felt suction, deep and cold. Mal turned back, grabbed her wrists, pulled with everything she had. The moss tore with a sound like wet cloth. Bree's leg came free, soaked in something thick and red-black. They didn't stop. The ridge was only 20 yards away, then 10. Then they reached it, scrambling over the final rocks to find open air ahead. Below them, lights. Far, maybe miles, but visible. The road. They had found the road. Bree collapsed, gasping. Mal dropped beside her, holding her side where a branch had torn her shirt open. Below, the forest began to close again. The creature had not followed them up the ridge. It waited just beyond the moss line, arms curling into the trees, roots slipping back beneath the surface like a hand retreating under a blanket. Bree lifted the radio. The red light blinked. She hit transmit. "This is Bree Thomas," she said, voice hoarse. "We're on the eastern ridge above Blackstone Hollow. 2 missing, 1 injured. Please, someone respond." The static hissed. Then a voice. "Copy. Signal received. Repeat location." Bree's knees buckled. They were going to make it. Behind her, Mal pointed. Dan was standing at the bottom of the ridge. Only it wasn't Dan. It wore his clothes, his face, but he moved too smoothly, too steadily. His skin had the wrong tone, too glossy, too clean. His left arm was no longer injured. His shirt was torn in the same place, but the wound beneath had sealed into perfect, scarless flesh. It looked up at them and smiled. Mal's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She was shaking, pointing at the figure below. Bree stared in silence. The thing that looked like Dan had begun walking, slowly, calmly, as if it were part of the trees, gliding through the moss without disturbing a single blade. Its eyes never blinked. Its arms swung at perfect angles. Each step was the same length, every movement too smooth to belong to anything human. Bree's hand tightened around the radio. The voice on the other end called again. She didn't respond. She could barely hear it over the sound of blood rushing in her ears. The imitation Dan reached the base of the ridge and stopped. It tilted its head as if studying the two of them. Then its chest opened. Not with violence, not with sound. It opened like a flower blooming, silent and wet, peeling back layers of green tissue and tendrils. Inside was not muscle or bone. It was pulsing, glowing. Root-like cords shifted in spirals, and buried in the center, something moved. A face. Not Dan's. Hers. Bree stepped back, knees buckling. The thing showed her a mirror grown from the forest's memory. Her own features twitched behind a membrane of moss and tissue, eyes staring without recognition. It had already begun to absorb her. "Bree," Mal said, voice raw, "we have to go." They turned and scrambled down the other side of the ridge. The slope was sharp, lined with jagged stone and broken roots. They slid more than climbed, bouncing off boulders, cutting hands and arms as they fell through low brush. When they reached the bottom, the forest changed again. The trees stood farther apart now. The moss was thinner. Beneath it, hard-packed earth appeared, dry leaves, normal forest floor. The smell of rot and age returned. The ground didn't breathe anymore. It was still, dead. They had crossed some kind of boundary. Mal collapsed near a crooked tree, gasping. Bree fell beside her, clutching her ribs. She thought she'd cracked one on the descent, but the pain didn't matter now. They were past it. They were out. Lights appeared in the distance. Headlights, 2 sets, coming down a dirt access road barely wide enough for the tires. When they reached the women, both trucks skidded to a stop. 4 rangers jumped out, armed and armored. One of them rushed to Bree and pulled the radio from her limp fingers. "We got you," he said. "You're okay now." Another helped Mal up and started wrapping her arm. She didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on the ridge behind them, watching the tree line. One of the trucks had a satellite dish mounted on the roof. A ranger got inside and started the relaying information over a secured frequency. Bree heard only fragments. Containment breach, active route response, western perimeter compromised. The oldest of the 4 rangers knelt beside her. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Did it speak to you?" Bree stared at him. "Did the ground shift when you were still? Did you see the roots move?" She nodded slowly. He sighed, removed his hat, and rubbed a scar on his temple. "We didn't think it was growing this far east." "What is it?" she asked. The man looked up at the trees. "Older than the forest, older than us, something buried under the crust that got tired of being still. We've kept it from expanding for years, but it learns. Every sleeper it takes, every dream it eats, it remembers, it builds." Mal joined them, her voice barely audible. "It took Dan, then it made him walk again." The ranger nodded. "It wants to be more than a forest." Another of the men called from behind the truck, "Sir, ridge is moving again." The ground trembled slightly. The trees at the ridgeline began to bow forward, slow and deliberate, not from wind but from force underneath. Roots lifted, moss rolled over rocks, the earth flexed like muscle. The ranger stood. "Get them in the truck." Bree and Mal were lifted, half dragged into the second vehicle. As the doors slammed shut, the first ranger returned to his radio, speaking fast and low. The engine roared to life, wheels skidding in the dirt as they turned away. Behind them, the forest rose. Not just the trees. The whole ridge lifted like a shoulder from a buried beast. Bark splitting, roots snapping. Something vast and white began to emerge from the slope, like bone or exoskeleton, covered in layers of soil and stone. It opened in segments, revealing a wet hollow beneath. The forest had teeth. Bree pressed her face to the glass. Then the ground fell away. The thing collapsed inward, not in destruction, but in retreat. It folded into itself like it had exhaled, curling downward as if going back to sleep. The moss surged behind it, smoothing the earth, sealing the bones. The trucks kept driving. Miles passed. The forest changed again. Normal trees, birds, noise, the kind of wild that humans expect. They reached a ranger station just before dawn. Floodlights bathed the lot. The 2 women were led inside and given water, blankets, and silence. No one asked for their story.
The staff didn't need to. They already knew it. Later, in a room with no windows, a man in uniform approached them. He looked more military than ranger, but he wore no insignia. "We'll be monitoring you," he said. "What you saw, what you think you saw, is classified." Bree blinked. "What happens if it grows again?" "It won't." "You don't know that." The man didn't blink. "If it does, we'll erase it." He handed them forms, release statements, psychological waivers, non-disclosure agreements. Bree didn't read them. She just signed. They were dropped off at a town 4 hours east, given prepaid phones and cash. No identification, no transportation. They sat on a bench and watched cars pass. Mal turned to Bree, her voice flat. "What if it comes looking for us?" Bree didn't answer. That night, as they lay in a motel room with the lights on, Bree woke up, gasping. The mattress was warm. Too warm. She jumped up and yanked the sheets away. The bed was fine, just memory foam. But the sensation lingered. She glanced at Mal, still asleep, then looked down at her own arm. Something was beneath her skin. Just for a second. A twitch. A ripple. Gone before she could scream. She didn't sleep again. Not for days. 2 weeks later, a logging company operating north of the basin reported equipment loss. Chainsaws vanished overnight. Trees fell in unnatural patterns. One crew member disappeared. The others refused to stay, swearing the forest floor hummed when they stood still. The company blamed bad terrain. The government closed the site. They called it a contamination risk. 1 month later, in a different forest, a hiker went missing. When they found his camp, the tent had collapsed into the ground. His sleeping pad was soaked in green slime. No prints, no struggle, no body. Just moss. Waiting.
Thank you for listening to this story. Your support means a lot and helps keep these tales coming. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe and follow for more dark and immersive stories just like this one. New horrors await. Don't miss what's coming next.